Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you weekly. Now, this evening we are going to be talking about watersheds, and specifically the watersheds that cover the area around the city of Grant and the communities around that city. And I have with me to help me with this topic, Council Member Lawrence Cederstrom. He has been on these programs in the past numerous times talking about the updates regarding the city of Grant, but he's also been keeping his eye on the watersheds and what they are doing, and also the issues that are concerning the watersheds, because ultimately keeping our water clean and our groundwater clean is very important to the people, not just over in that area because they have wells, but to everybody, no matter who you are, because water is a finite resource that once it's contaminated, once it's polluted, it is very, very difficult to bring it back to a state where it is not contaminated and not polluted. And so today we're going to be talking about the watersheds. Afterwards, we're going to have some film footage regarding comments of Mr. Larry Lanoue at the watershed district meeting not long ago. And then we will also have film footage from the 3M settlement meeting that was held in Oakdale a few weeks back. Now, we have shown some of that film footage already on these programs, but some of it is worth watching again, since again it goes to that issue of clean groundwater. So thank you, Mr. Cederstrom, for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. We have a lot going on here. You know, we have two dump sites in Grant. One was from 1987, called the 3M Grant dump site, and we also have the Wildwood School. Now, I made numerous appeals to be on that settlement, and they blew me off.
Oh, the settlement committee.
3M, the settlement committee, right. Because we have a dump that's named a 3M Township dump. And I got the information out of Chicago, the EPA, but in '87 they didn't know all the different toxins, you know.
Well, you know,
CFCs, CFPs,
yes.
FPCs, you know, and they didn't test for them. Well, we're going to talk about the 2011 testing that they've done for this hockey arena. I was just at a Rice Creek watershed meeting because Larry Lanoue and I both goes to those. Let me back up. In Grant, there are 3 watershed districts. On the west side, it's Rice Creek. And then on the east side, on the northeast corner, it's Browns Creek. And then on the southeast side, it's Valley Branch watershed. And as you know, if you've ever looked at your tax statements, a certain amount of your tax bill goes automatically to the watershed districts to maintain water quality and do testing. The other interesting thing is there is also set up something called a local governing unit. Those are the ones that are designated to have the power to make decisions. For example, in our case, they did a waste assessment to see what the toxins were there, and you can also do an in-depth study. Well, that is to be determined by whoever is the local governing unit. And what is interesting about this is the city of Grant and several other places around there have given their authority to the watershed districts to be the local governing authority. The only one that I'm aware of that isn't was Hugo, because on County Road 4 up there in 1974, when they widened and built the road, what they did was the watershed district gave them the wrong statistics, and they put the culvert underneath the road 3 feet too high. Oh. Well, it took them over 20 years, 25 years to finally get it corrected, to lower it. In the meantime, many people's lands who were just fields before became swamps. And after a long series of lawsuits, the city of Hugo is the local governing unit.
And see, with the designation of a local governing unit, it often, that decision boils down to who's got the resources of the professional staff on, that is available to review various proposals. And it's not uncommon for smaller towns who don't have staff, that they have, city departments, like a public works department or something like that, or townships, to have that designated off to some other entity. Sometimes it's a county. So some townships in parts of Minnesota have the county designated as that local governing unit.
Well, there's a lot of specialized knowledge in a city, or probably doesn't have all the people that have specialized in watershed, in testing, et cetera. So that's how that goes.
And it's to me, it is curious, although I know that you've talked about this before, how, the city of Grant is a very small little city, and yet it is served by 3 different watersheds. And then you have a big city like Maplewood, for instance, and I believe that Maplewood is served by only 2 different watersheds. But give us a little history as to, with the city of Grant, why is it that it seems like it's got, that it's positioned in just the right spot to have 3 different watershed districts involved within its borders?
Well, what's interesting about this is if you draw a line through Grant, it is kind of a watershed per se. As a matter of fact, they're just changing the borders after they do this computer, with all the technology we have. You can size the ground. They found old ruins this way too. But part of it flows towards the St. Croix River. The rest of it flows from Montemita, that's where Rice Creek is basically, flows towards the Mississippi. And the southeast corner flows down, not directly to the east of St. Croix, but more to the south. So we're kind of at a little high point, which is kind of like on the side of a mountain. The stuff on one side goes to the right, and the one on the left goes to the left, and that's what they're sitting with. And it's really interesting because they're just changing these boundaries because of the new technology they've found to really determine where the topography of the.
Sure.
And they can do that much better now.
So then they can manage it better, because then they actually are within the correct borders for where that water flow is going.
Well, it's very interesting for me because I had just dug a pond because of the hydrovac dumping last year. I was very alarmed and the city refused to do anything. So I dug a pond on the northeast corner of my field because there's a culvert that goes underneath the road. And that man brought those 300 to 400 hydrovac trucks in. Well, it's half water and half dirt. And essentially what he did is he raised and changed the grade on his 2.5 acre field. So now it's much more coming down towards that northeast or northwest corner, so it'll come under the culvert. And I noticed my pond this year is way up to the brim. It was a foot down before. So that excavation or bringing the dirt in has significantly changed. Well, what's interesting is they want me to change a little bit of the grade, which I agreed to. And I have the Rice Creek, or the Browns Creek 2 permits, as a matter of fact. Well, now I'm going to Rice Creek, and I'm going to have to get a permit from them. Of course, I also have one from the county. So there's a lot of regulation, in other words, in order to make sure that you're managing the stormwater runoff properly. Yes, and if you disturb over an acre of ground, the MPCA comes in. But I basically have found that the MPCA is kind of a toothless wonder. And I'll give you an example. We've talked about the hockey rink that is being put on, they want to put it on the Wildwood School site. Well, we were just at a last meeting, we're actually at a workshop too, and they've already done it. They required the construction people to do an environmental assessment worksheet. In other words, what possible problems could we have with toxins? Well, they found out that the municipal waste was 30 feet, not 10 to 15 like they thought. Then they put all these co-packs on them that are conditions for them to do. Well, this interesting because the city of Grant, of course, the Three Blind Mice voted against having an environmental impact study. And they're saying, oh, the local governing unit can do that. And we went to the last time, and hopefully we'll be able to bring you this footage. This is just less than a week ago, that we pointed out to Rice Creek that Grant has given the watershed districts to be the local governing unit. So if they so desire, they are the ones that could ask for the environmental impact study, which says, oh, wait a minute, here are the dangers. What else can we do? We have to, because we found these problems, we want to know what the impact is and what can we do differently? What special precautions do we have to take?
And of course, as we've talked about on these programs in the past, I mean, this is a concern because this particular site, years and years ago, was the site of the Bel Air sanitation
From 1954
dump.
through 1995, this was a dump. And up until 72, the interesting thing was the transformers. And they have PFCs and all that nasty stuff from the liquid inside the transformer. Well, they would bring that out, and old Charlie Johnson would tell the kids, well, barrels take space to run over the barrels, so all that's in the ground. The other interesting...
Nothing like crushing it into the ground so it can seep into the groundwater. Oh, what a mess.
The significance of this also is Gopher Oil wanted to, they did a significant amount of dumping there. And their court case went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled, yes, you can sell the assets to your corporation, but the liabilities go with it, because they wanted to sell the assets and leave the liabilities behind, and they were told by this, and this went to the state Supreme Court, you can't do that. They go together. So they were trying to get out of their liability for the dumping. And it has been cleaned up once, but how satisfactory. They were supposed to also have 2 wells to be tested, and they were never installed. They're supposed to have annual testing, and I think, to my knowledge, since 2011 when it was installed, there's been 1 or 2 tests done on the whole site. And that's because the city of Grant, the Three Blind Mice, once again, are not enforcing the conditional use permit. And now we've been lobbying the Rice Creek, because that's where most of the school is in, to have an environmental impact study. So we'll see how this goes. There's a lot of issues here. I think it's stupid to be putting young children on a toxic waste site. 53 kids have already been withdrawn from school. 2 teachers have had cancer. And we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So,
right. Now, I know that recently Councilmember Larry Lanoue was at the Rice Creek watershed meeting that was held last month, correct?
Correct.
And we do have a part of a clip of the larger film footage, of course, that we can show a little bit to our viewers and walk them through some of his comments. Should we do that now?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay, well, let's take a look.
Make that clear. I am representing myself and my concerns.
Okay.
Okay. First off, I want to thank the board members for the opportunity to speak here today. And I'd like to thank Mr. Waller that came to our city council at public comment and was allowed to speak. Following last week's city council meeting, after discussing the Rank 2 project proposal, our city moved to restrict public comment to only residents of the city of Grant. So now the board here is no longer allowed to come and address this issue at public comment. And if you're not on the agenda, and that would have to be by the majority approving you, it's likely you'll never have a voice in Grant. So I recognize that.
Now, this first introduction of what Larry Lanoue is sharing with the water district, it to me is somewhat disconcerting that from what he's saying and what I understand is that the Grant City Council now has decided, the majority has decided and passed a policy that only residents of the city of Grant can get up at a council meeting to address the city council. Is that correct?
That is correct. The other interesting thing about that, they do not record public comment. They have 5 slots of 3 minutes apiece. So the citizens never get to see public comments. So if you're going up there to say, hey, there's been 3 burglaries on my street, it never gets out to the public. Basically, they're trying to discourage citizen participation on any level.
And so if indeed they have taken it off camera and that they have it so restrictive, why do they need to further restrict it to say that you have to be a resident of the city of Grant? I actually think that that could be challenged in court, because I think that if you allow a forum for comment before your council, that you cannot pick and choose who gets to speak based upon where they live. What is the overreaching governmental interest in limiting the speech to only those people who happen to reside in the city of Grant, who have the money to be able to live in the city of Grant? You see, this actually forecloses a lot of people, because there might be a lot of people who would like to address the city of Grant, maybe that they have their horses boarded there, but they don't live there, but they have their horses boarded there. Or maybe they use the trails, or maybe they hike in the city of Grant, but they don't have the income in order to live there, and yet they could never address the city council about concerns they have within the council and the city's borders. Now, to me, I think that that could be challenged.
Well, I think it could be too, but it pretty much has gotten to be a joke because the mayor decides who he's going to call, and he always calls on his cronies. And we have one elderly member from the Planning Commission that always comes up with something. A couple of months ago, he was talking about when him and his twin brother were in the Army, and this big guy kept challenging him, and he knocked him on the ground. Another time, and he goes on for past the 3 minutes. I've seen him go on for 5 to 7, and the mayor just sits there. Another time, he's talking about he was testing aluminum cans and what he had to do when he was, 50 years ago or something. So it's really become extremely dysfunctional. The mayor calls on basically his cronies. He's got a little section back there. They sit in the back row and come up and either they talk about something unrelated or else they spew negative things. And quite frequently, I am the object of their negative comments. Matter of fact, the White Bear Press, I'm just getting a letter in this week. Someone wrote the 3rd letter attacking me with all types of false statements. And it blows my mind that they will print lies like that in a newspaper. But we're going to see what happens. It's very vicious out there in terms of politics.
So not only do you have to have a lot of money in order to live in the city of Grant, to pay the taxes and whatever else, but you have to have a thick skin too.
Very thick skin. And if you're on the right side, if it's their idea, for example, there's just a big struggle now. This Joyce Wheelander, and this is a big article in the White Bear Press, she wants to have a solar garden. There's only 4 places in Grant that a solar garden would meet the requirements. It went through the Planning Commission, it got to the City Council, and the majority said, well, we're striking this one, we're not allowing it. Right. And she's the only one that was going to have it.
And keep in mind, our viewers may not know this, but I don't believe that she has ever voted for any of the members who are in the majority of the city council.
That is exactly for the retribution.
That's what they're doing. I think that they know that, and this is how they're getting back at people who didn't vote for them, is by prohibiting them from using their land in a way that is certainly a best and highest use, and also good for our environment.
Well, the other thing they've been doing, and this is a history of this, they've been, the Met Council would love to get sewer and water in, and they keep pushing the envelope. Like, for example, we have a wedding barn, and wrote something special for that. Also, another guy wanted to have a supper club on a main street of 96 and Manning. Well, we don't have that. They made something special for that, just for that guy. If you have 20 acres, you can have a supper club,
Well, that is
then a third one.
That's a good contrast. You can have a nightclub and a bar and a wedding barn, but you can't have a solar farm. Now, I would like to see the justification for that, because City of Grant is not that large, and the land that the solar farm would be going on is not all that much different than the land where the wedding barn is going.
Well, we have two bottom-feeding realtors, the mayor and deputy mayor, and then, of course, we have secondhand Denny. He rarely says anything except second that. But the third thing is to point it out, a man bought 53 acres right next to, close to the wedding barn, and he wanted to put an indoor ice arena, okay? This building was 100 by 300 with 3 bathrooms, 2 dressing rooms, etc. And the mayor, Carr, when he was the mayor, said, "Oh, withdraw your CUP. These horse people build big barns. You could build what you want." Well, a horse barn is an agricultural building, and we have that in our plan that agricultural buildings, you know, you could pretty much build what you want, but if you have enough land for 50 cows, you're not going to build a barn for 5,000 because the economics aren't there.
Right.
But this man was building a hockey arena, which is a commercial operation, and it is not agricultural. There's nothing.
And there's also the consideration of this, is that when you're building the horse barn or whatever the stable that you're building for horses or for cows, I'm not certain that you have to have it be ADA compliant.
That's right.
Because that is your private farming agricultural business. It's not open to the public necessarily. And whereas this other commercial entity, this rink, would have to be certainly accommodating for individuals that have to comply with the ADA, all kinds of other commercial building standards because of what it is. So it's really totally on a different playing field if you're considering apples to apples.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is how they twist things into a pretzel for the people they like.
Yes.
And this went through the Planning Commission completely. It was a 6-to-1 vote. Interestingly, one of the guys running for council says, "We don't want a solar farm, but I'd like to see more houses," which is exactly what we don't want in Grant. We want to keep the 10-acre minimums. Of course, there's a rule that there has to be a 10-acre average, so if you have 50 acres, you can have 3 5-acre lots. The 5 acres is the minimum size, but there has to be 2 other bigger lots to compensate because you can only have 5 buildings there.
Because it has to average, that's correct. Well, let's go back to our film footage of Councilmember Larry Lanou speaking before the watershed.
It's not only an honor but a privilege to speak here today, and I ask if you just be patient because I promise to try to keep as close to your 3 minutes as I can.
Okay.
Recently, I met with Representative Peter Fisher, and members of the employer from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Chris Formby, Kurt Kadelka, and Bill Prieb, discussing contamination and plumes in both the city of Grant and Matamidi. They indicated that the Minnesota Department of Health is also concerned in starting to track incidents relating to the Wildwood Elementary students and their health. It was very informative. I'm here today to ask that the board order an environmental impact statement for the Rink 2 project that will be coming before you. Too often, all the permitting bodies act as a silo, relying on each agency to do their job without speaking to each other or reviewing their findings to make their final decisions. Today I'm providing you with documentation I'm asking to be received and entered into today's record. The first document is the same document I was provided as a member of the Grant City Council to approve the Rink 2 project, and it was to not ask for an environmental impact statement. It is the environmental assessment worksheet that was provided to me.
Now, Councilmember Larry Lanou makes some good comments there in that it's important, especially when you're talking about these types of environmental issues, that the different governmental entities that they talk to each other and understand what kind of discussions are being held at each level of government, because this is a number one issue for the health and safety and the welfare of the people of the community. And so if you've got your watershed district, you've got your municipality, you have your county, you have your state, like he was talking to the state representative, you know, you've got the state representative involved as well. I mean, that's how you tackle these problems and really work together.
Well, one of the things I want to point out, all the data that they use in this environmental assessment worksheet dated back till 2011. They don't have current data. This is 2000, that's 7-year-old data. Do you think something in the environment may change in 7 years? I think so. And we've worked with, we talked to Jenny Yingling down at the health department, and she's all wrapped up testing the water down south. And I don't have time to test that. Well, their conditional use permit is not being enforced. It should be. They should be held accountable.
For the rink, you mean?
For the Wildwood School, for the whole parcel, because there is a lot of pollution there. There's problems.
And certainly in the span of 7 years, if there is indeed a plume under the ground and is interfering with the groundwater, in 7 years, that plume can shift and change depending upon what kind of conditions have changed just with the topography of the land. And that is something that I know, say for instance, with the Ramsey Conservation District, that was something that they were working on when they were in existence, is that and that of course is not the Ramsey Watershed District, but it's another, it's the Soil and Water Conservation Board that was in existence. They were working with the groundwater, and they were mapping out where the plumes were in Ramsey County, and that was something that they that they saw in their documentation, is that there's the shifting that does happen over time. So you're right to say, well, 7 years data, if it's 7 years old, is it valid data today? Well, how do you make sure that you have good data?
Well, the interesting thing is that one of my all-around grant shows a couple of months ago, I went through that large newspaper article for the St. Paul paper, and they were talking about how the plumes were shifting. And the analogy they made is, if you have, for example, a large cup of liquid, and if you suck out of the bottom or the top, the other fluid goes in to take the space that you vacated. So that's the problem they're having with identifying plumes, because if something happens over here, that's going to maybe make that plume move further over here. So
like say for instance, you've got a large municipality in Washington County, starts with the letter W, and suddenly they've got more population and they're pulling more water out of the groundwater. That could cause that plume to shift.
Well, that's the problem they're saying, because the plume is shifting all the time.
Yes.
And that's one of the issues we have to deal with. But again, my concern is there's no recent testing, and everybody they're in their little silo, and they say, no, you do it. And some people don't want to take responsibility.
Yeah.
But we were at a workshop. I will bring back some of that clips. We have to get it transferred. But they were stepping around this. There's only a couple people on the board that really want to do something. The other 3 members are just kind of, well, we don't have money, and they come up with every reasons why they can't do it rather than why they should do it.
Right. And certainly I think that there is a lot of support within the population of our communities, that they want to have money and resources spent on ensuring that our groundwater and our environment are being protected, and that we're doing what we can that we should do. And so the people support it, and so there shouldn't be this pushback by the governmental entities saying, well, we don't have the money. Well, why is it that there isn't the money? It should be our number one top priority compared to many of the other things that they spend money on.
I would agree. I think they do have a budget for testing. They can also hire outside agencies. But I'm trying to think of the outfit that did the testing for Wildwood again, and the name escapes me, but the man that runs the company used to work for MPCA, so he gets a pass on everything he gets done. It's just really pathetic.
Well, it sounds like part of it's the old boy club, as you were describing.
Oh, absolutely. So it's interesting, but we're going to keep on top of this, and I will, as I get more information, I will bring it to you and bring you some updates, and we can see how this all flushes out.
Yes, no, I think that will be excellent, Mr. Cedarstrom, because our viewers, this is one of the few places where they can actually see the film footage from these meetings, because so many of these meetings are not cable cast, they are not taped, and it's only through the efforts of volunteers who show up with a camera that we have that film footage. And that is part of the mission that we have here at Off the Record News and our Put Your Hands Together Productions, is to get that film footage out to folks so that they can see it for themselves, so they don't have to run around the countryside trying to get to every
Well,
single
not only
meeting.
that, just to make people aware of what's happening. I mean, there's too many things that are swept under the rug, and we have to let the population know what's going on.
It aids in accountability, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Well, folks, we are at the point now where we are going to then have film footage of the Rice Creek Water District meeting, and that will be, there's about 20 minutes of video from that. And then after that, there will be some of the film footage from that 3M settlement meeting that was held in Oakdale. So please stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy watching the meeting. Thank you.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. And open mic. Anybody in the audience like to speak today? Okay, please come up, state your name and address for the record.
Larry Lanou, with the City Council for the City of Grant. I'm not here representing the City Council. I want to make that clear. I am representing myself and my concerns.
Okay,
Okay, first off, I want to thank the board members for the opportunity to speak here today, and I'd like to thank Mr. Waller that came to our city council at public comment and was allowed to speak. Following last week's city council meeting, after discussing the Rank 2 project proposal, our city moved to restrict public comment to only residents of the City of Grant. So now the board here is no longer allowed to come and address this issue at public comment. And if you're not on the agenda, and that would have to be by the majority approving you, it's likely you'll never have a voice in Grant. So I recognize it's not only an honor but a privilege to speak here today, and I ask if you just be patient, because I promise to try to keep as close to your 3 minutes as I can.
okay,
Recently, I met with Representative Peter Fisher, and members of the employer from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Chris Formby, Kurt Kadelka, and Bill Prieb, discussing contamination and plumes in both the City of Grant and Matamidi. They indicated that the Minnesota Department of Health is also concerned and starting to track incidents relating to the Wildwood Elementary students and their health. It was very informative. I'm here today to ask that the board order an environmental impact statement for the Rank 2 project that will be coming before you. Too often, all the permitting bodies act as a silo, relying on each agency to do their job without speaking to each other or reviewing their findings to make their final decisions. Today, I'm providing you with documentation I'm asking to be received and entered into today's record. The first document is the same document I was provided as a member of the Grant City Council to approve the Rank 2 project, and it was to not ask for an environmental impact statement. It is the environmental assessment worksheet that was provided to me. Many of you have probably been provided that. It was a 1,531-page document. I doubt that many has put the hours in and read the whole document. But I do have a condensed version, and I'd like to just kind of highlight some of the areas of concern that I believe would trigger the need for an environmental impact. Page 5 alone states that the EAW was flawed and not provided honest information. It asks, are there any future developments for the site? They checked no. This is false. Documentation provided here today will show that Matamidi School District's plans to move H. Anderson Elementary School grades 3 to 5 to this site. It also says, is this project a subsequent stage of an earlier project? They checked no. It actually was part of an earlier project. It was on a conditional use permit, and it's on the drawings that I will provide you today. Okay, the conditional use permit for this site was approved to place Wildwood Elementary in future grades in there in 2011. In November last year, Mayor Jeff Huber passed a resolution supporting Senate File 1837, prohibiting schools from being placed on a dump site. After he approved that, it seems like he's not too sure what he's doing. Last month's meeting, Mayor Huber, who voted to approve the Wildwood Elementary on the dump site, stated that the Wildwood Elementary site was a tougher site than the Rink 2 because of the toxins that are listed there. Okay, page 15 states that the Bay West did not review all environmental reports associated with the dump site or work associated with the construction of Wildwood Elementary School. So Bay West didn't do their job. It states that, page 18 states that additional information is not available on the WIMN, which is What's in My Neighborhood site, which listed the Grant Township dump site located within 0.3 of a mile of the Rank 2 proposal. Once again, I ask, where is the plume? Where is the plume from Bel Air Sanitation and from the 3M dump site? I know this body stated that you guys would ask and do some further testing, and I hope that is being followed up on. I believe you will. I believe you're honorable people. Page 19 states that the proposal site on top of a former dump site creates inherent environmental concerns for site workers and the public during construction of the facility and for future building occupants. That alone should cause concern. And page 20 states that there are inherent risks to nearby surface water bodies associated with the excavating of large volumes of toxic waste from the dump site, and runoff from the excavation area could potentially impact surface water bodies. That is the purpose of your board. And I'm getting right to the end, so be patient. Page 21 states that it appears there's a potential risk for methane gas migration and intrusion to any future structure constructed on the dump. Page 20 also states that they will have to provide an active methane mitigation sensor, which will alarm and provide warning when methane exceeds unacceptable levels. Documentation provided by two sources from the Department of Labor and Industry, Plumbing Section. Item from Kathy Tran, Plumbing Plan Review Program, and Bradley C. Erickson, Public Health Engineer, states, any water service pipe regulated by the Minnesota Plumbing Code may not pass through contaminated soils. And it gives the rules and the number and subpart. A horizontal separation of 10 feet must be maintained between a water line and the outer limits of a municipal dump. Removal of contaminated soil and backfilling with soils is not a permissible alternative. Those are the Minnesota Plumbing codes. I don't believe they've changed. And yet, that's exactly what it says in this Bay West, that they are going to go through contaminated soils and that there are inherent risks. So that leads me to believe that perhaps when Mr. Zick came up and talked at his school board meeting, he was concerned about a quid pro quo between the mayor and the school board when they're recognizing the mayor's son for a scholarship. I don't understand how he could have signed a resolution, and it's in this packet today, stating they don't need an impact study or statement. Everything I've read you today indicates that indeed you do need and should. And if this body does not order one, As you see, I'm probably fairly consistent. Some of the documentation you see I've written in here is back from 2011. I will be back, and I will contact Mr. Bob Bowcox, Aaron Brockovich is environmental engineer, and I'll take it to the federal level if that's where we have. I hope this body simply asks for that impact statement and that you force them and hold them accountable, because failure to do so may put this body at liability, especially for all the information I provided you. Now, this is just kind of a summary. It's what I was provided to make that decision. Like I said, I'm pretty aware that you haven't, read the whole 1,500 and some pages. I haven't. In fact, I was almost didn't even want to download it onto my computer. It takes so much room. And so, with the information given you today, when this comes in front of this body, and I realize you guys say you have a certain scope that you have to operate in, but I do not believe it prohibits you from asking for an impact statement, although the city of Grant refuses to do so. I think the city of Grant is relying that if they did not ask for an impact statement, they send it forward to you, and you automatically feel that the city of Grant has done its job. In my opinion, the city of Grant has failed miserably. That's why I'm here asking for your help today. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have any questions,
Excuse me, I have a couple questions. I do remember when he was here before, and we were saying that we were going to have some testing done to see what was happening. The next lake down was what?
Lost Lake.
Lost Lake, yeah, I forgot. Any rate, I know I wrote to them, and I think we probably did too. I was told that it was a woman that I had spoke to, that they would
Jennifer
look
Ling
at
Ling.
this or do some testing of it, and it was going to be, they were backlogged, and it would be somewhere towards the end of the summer, and I don't know what that means, the end of September, the end of August. Did anybody here get anything in response back? Nobody has? Because we were going to do it.
Board President, Manager Hockey, Jenny from Health, I believe, is who you were talking about. And we haven't heard anything on the test, the status of their testing action.
Okay, so number one, we never got that back. Number two is that I know that in our mission, we're talking about water quality and flooding. So we've got two things that we try to check on. With water quality, would this fall under the quality of the water that's going into Lost Lake at all, or anything like that that we should be worried about legally? If we don't do something or try to do some more testing or find out.
Board President, Manager Hockey, we've talked about this before. Currently, you don't budget for, have a program for this particular, you have a suite of water quality elements that you measure in certain lakes. Mr. Koshin has presented that to the board numerous times. That's the current program. So the board would need to consider other programs in additional capacity to measure those additional aspects, if that's what you'd like to do in this case.
Yeah, Madam President, the rink's not the polluter, is the problem. I mean, our jurisdiction's gonna be over the rink.
Right.
And so the rink doesn't cause pollution, and the rink doesn't, we would look for what the runoff is and the impact of additional impervious surface is. So, not sure there's a nexus between what we can do and the grievances and concerns here.
Actually, Representative or Manager Bradley, the document I provided you and those statements says that it will have an impact. There is an inherent risk of removing 50,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil to your water bodies. That's what I just read you today. That is your job, to protect the water bodies. If you look at the documentation, I provided you with a preliminary assessment report from 1992 that says it's suspected that this dump has already contaminated the wells 200 feet south side of Highway or 75th Street over there. And it said that they're going to run contaminated soils. If you look at some of the further documentation, it says they have contaminated soils, that they're going to run their water lines through contaminated soils, which is in violation of the plumbing code. So it does say that it is going to inherit or provides an inherent risk that type of construction to do that. And the cost being borne by a environmental impact statement is not borne by the watershed. It's borne by the applicant. So you simply asking for that statement will not cost the Rice Creek watershed. It will simply give you further assurances and provide you less exposure to liability if you have that prior to making your decision.
Okay.
Another thing, in the fact that we're trying to, I guess, wipe our hands of this whole thing, it sounds like, because has there ever been a precedence been set that we have done any kind of testing for any kind of toxins in any of our lakes? Have we ever done it in the past? And do we wipe our hands of the fact that we never will do any of them? I guess, is it legally said we cannot test for toxins? Is that what it says?
To my knowledge, there's no legal restriction. The board has directed previously. We've had numerous conversations at workshops and at board meetings. You have not directed staff to do that at this time.
Okay.
Through all those various conversations we've had on this topic.
Okay, so how did it not get followed through with Jenny at the public? Because we did say we wanted to find out something
Yep.
about what was happening in the water. We did not.
We don't even know if she's
Continue
done
with
it
that.
yet because.
Okay, so we don't know.
yeah.
So we don't know that.
So
And
we-
so we
we
do
need to do that.
looking
We'll
and
need
we
to
will
find that
test for
out,
this.
yeah.
We need to follow up on that.
Yep, we'll follow that.
Okay, and then are we prohibited against ever asking for an EIS? After somebody has come through and it shows that there have been things in the documents that have indicated that some of the things were not answered perhaps truthfully because they had studies that indicated, because somebody wants to get this done, as we well know. And you can work with things on saying, hey, we don't need a EIS. Are we prohibited from ever asking for an EIS if it's been proven somewhere along the line, or do we ever ask for even an EAW?
Mr. Holtman?
Madam Chair, any public body that has responsibility to formally approve a project has jurisdiction to receive a petition for environmental review. The Environmental Quality Board may reallocate the responsibility for that review. It has adopted rules about which agency should be the chief agency to manage the environmental review process. Also, I'm not familiar precisely with all of the context and facts that Mr. Lanou is referring to, but if an environmental review process already was conducted through an EAW, typically the next step would be to appeal the decision not to proceed to an EIS as opposed to initiating a new petition with a different body. But of course, facts are complex in these regards. So I'm not familiar precisely with the project in question and the way and when it will come before the board, but that's the general framework.
Okay.
Another thing for you, Mr. Attorney. If we've been brought, this has all been brought to our attention, and we've got it on minutes and everything are documented, and down the road, something occurs that does cause some of the things that he fears that could occur by having the fact that this is 0.3 of a mile from a waste site, that it's being built, that the land had anyway, everything that we've heard. How can we be held harmless if we have known that this has been brought before us? How can we end up legally be held harmless not to have something happen to us later in any litigation? You got to research that.
Manager
one, don't
Hockey
you?
and Madam Chair, board members. Again, as a fairly strong, consistent principle of law, public bodies that sit in a regulatory capacity or a review capacity are exercising their judgment in that capacity and are protected from liability as to the decisions that they make. Typically, the liability would go with the landowner, the public body who's developing the property and putting it to a particular use. Those who are actively the proponents of the development, not the public bodies who are reviewing it and making discretionary judgments for a more generalized public purpose.
Ah,
Okay.
So this way, we can continue to keep our hands out of it, I understand, is what we seem to be leaning towards,
Well, we
huh?
still have to have the water report.
It seems to me our role is to, when and if a permit comes before us, to review the permit within the scope of our authority and determine whether or not we have the information we need in order to determine the environmental water quality and runoff characteristics of that particular site. The issues Mr. Lanou brings up are absolutely within the jurisdiction of the Grant Township and its authority to issue building permits, and the school district and its responsibility to decide what it's going to build as a building. We have a small niche, and we need to exercise that niche carefully and thoughtfully.
Exactly. I agree.
Then going, excuse me, Madam President, so going further, we have said we were going to have this water and have it tested and that has not been done, and we understand that they had put it off. So we have got to pursue that. That was within our ability to do that.
And
Is
we've
that
already
correct?
agreed to do
And
that.
we
Mr.
expect
Attorney,
that we'll be
too.
getting the answers.
Attorneys on both ends. Oh, gee.
Okay, we have to move forward.
Okay,
Oh,
if I may, I'd like to leave this document here for matter of record, so it is left with you, so that you can see that what I said is
True.
truthful in nature. And I give you one thought as I leave here. The Matamidi School District owns O.H. Anderson, which they plan on bringing to this toxic site, and that's shown in the documentation provided over here that they approved in the conditional use permit. We seem to be more concerned, if you read that document, about blanding turtles than we are about the health of our children. If our school district was honest, we could put that hockey rink across the road. It'll be much cheaper to buy 160 acres across the road than to spend $3 million to take out 50,000 cubic yards and haul them out to a site that will accept that. That's why this government body, I would ask, would exercise a judgment, not make it easy. The school district has safe property at the O.H. Anderson if they'd like to, but they're not going to put a hockey rink on safe property because they need to put this hockey rink on public school property. They could buy land cheaper across the road, but when the bond fails, the taxpayers in the school district will end up paying for another failed hockey rink. It's cheaper. It's going to cost $3 to $4 million. It's been proven to take that toxic fill out of there and build it. They could buy the 160 acres across the road.
That's not pertinent
So
to what we do.
I will just leave
So,
on,
yeah.
on that, and I ask that this body spend more time, hold them more accountable. You are an elected body, and I think
We're
it is to
appointed.
protect the health, safety, and welfare. That's what I signed up for. My mayor says he's only a part-time mayor. When I signed up as a council member, I thought it was a full-time position. As I take it, you guys believe you have a full-time position to protect health, safety, and
No,
welfare.
we're appointed
We're
by our
appointed.
county
Or
commissioners.
appointed, but as a,
Per
you
diem.
consider yourself a full-time water commissioner, I'm sure. You don't take it as a part-time, occasionally I'll show up if I'd like.
I live
So,
and dream it all the time, Larry.
Good.
24
Okay.
hours.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you very
time,
much.
and I appreciate the
And Teresa,
opportunity
would
to
you make sure
speak.
that gets in there? Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to go Phil, number 5, we moved.
So, but wait, we're going to continue and make sure we pursue this testing. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah, but
Board
that's already
President,
on the-
Manager,
yeah.
I will follow up with Jenny today.
Good.
Via email.
Good, thank you.
Okay, very good.
All right, Board President, Board of Managers, new number 1, which was number 5, consideration of scheduling compliance hearing pending your workshop discussion. We have Justin Townsend. He's going to kind of give you, and you met him at the workshop, so he's the
Justin.
inspector on the site. He's going to come up and give you a brief background. Justin and Terrence went out there after the workshop on Monday, the 10th, at the site in Delwood. Come on up, Justin. You can load up your pictures. And took some good photos. There was some good work done, and he'll explain that to you. We still need, we're recommending that we got to finish the work out there and make sure that he's compliant, so we do have some staff recommendations related to that. But I wanted first, Justin, to give you an update on background of what, from a technical standpoint, he and Terrence saw on the site after the workshop.
Okay, very good.
Have you done surveys of the population to see if, for example, thyroid issues? because like right in my neighborhood, I can think of 3 people. So, wondering about that. Are you seeing clusters or being tested for that or surveyed?
So the question was about other types of effects, such as thyroid effects. We have not done that kind of work to gather that information. It can be very hard to track that down, and we don't have a mandate to do that. It's not reportable to the state, so we don't have a tracking system for that. We certainly, we look at the things that we have data for, such as cancer and birth outcomes and other types of things, and unfortunately we're limited to those types of data sets. We have not been given the resources or the mandate to do anything beyond what we've actually currently have the resources for.
As a follow-up, about 2.5 months ago, a neighbor of mine was concerned about cancer and the prevalence of friends of his that were experiencing all types of health issues. As we talked over coffee, the issue between correlation and causation came up. I don't know well enough. Can you talk about your world with those two elements?
Right, and with regards to these chemicals, our knowledge of these chemicals has really been gathered over about the last 20 to 25 years since they really came into our knowledge in terms of them being environmental contaminants. We can do studies in test animals that I referred to before where we can do that and control them very carefully, and we can establish causation. We can show that if animals are exposed to certain chemicals, these types of health effects are happening because we can eliminate any other causes because of the way we can conduct animal studies. In people, that's a much, much, much harder thing to do. We can observe things, we can count things, but with humans there are so many different factors that contribute to virtually any disease that you can think of. That it's an extremely high bar to establish that exposure to just one particular thing in a person's life is the definitive cause of a certain health effect. And the evidence for these chemicals to produce those kinds of definitive health effects in people just isn't there. It's just being studied, it's being looked at. I think that work will continue, and we're certainly following all of that kind of information very carefully. But at this point,
one of your slides that it impacts the thyroid.
it can. That's what's been shown in test animals.
So how do we get a mandate to see how many people have had issues with thyroid in that area?
That's certainly something that could be done, but we haven't been given that mandate.
How do we make that happen?
I don't know that I have a direct
Jeff
answer.
Eager, contact your local representatives down in the legislature.
Would that be the way to do it?
That's certainly a way to do that type of activity. Yes.
You've got other mandates. How did you get those mandates from?
Legislature, from the federal.
Many of our mandates, that's correct, come from the legislature, from the federal government.
Who is our responsible elected official, state or federal?
I'm one of them.
Representative, the lead, Chuck Eager would be
Senator
your
Uyghur, the
senator.
governor. Yep.
Let me say this too, just as far as time, it's about 10 minutes to 8. We're going to stay as long as anybody has a question. Both Jim and Kurt said yes, Brian, I hope you can stay. Also, I'll stay. So until all the questions are done, we can stay here and get it on public television and also tape. If anybody wants to go out and look at the tables again, or the other representatives from both the health department and the pollution control, there are many other people here tonight that can support those questions.